Hey, it's Dr.J, and I talk a lot about future-proofing, precision biohacking, functional genetics, and coaching in medicine. I post about once a week, usually post at the end of the week, so do me a solid and slam that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you guys want to hear about. Today, though, what we're going to be talking a lot about is something that really drives me nuts, and that's when people use the term sensitivity, allergy, and intolerance. Those three words often get used meaning the same thing, or people talk about them as if they are the same thing when it comes to food specifically. So today I want to dig into a little bit about what the difference is between food allergies, food sensitivities, and food intolerances, because they are distinctly different processes through which your body reacts to food. They are the three ways that your body reacts to food. And as I said, it's just a massive pet peeve, and it really drives me nuts that other people and practitioners specifically continue to use these words interchangeably. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, for those of you guys who don't know me very well or don't know me that well already, I just really love helping people understand how their brain and body are built to function at their best. That's really the top of the list in terms of the things that what I'm trying to provide here by doing these videos on YouTube. And for people to have the options available to them to help maximize their health, their performance, their productivity, resilience, and longevity. Those are the things that I love to talk about. We're all unique in millions of different little ways, right down to the way we're coded at the DNA level and how our environment and our life experiences and our context mold us on a daily basis, minute to minute, really. But by understanding how our individual brains and bodies are built and being aware of what options we have available to us, that's how we can truly create precision medicine approaches to health and wellness, by arming people with the tools that they need to take a proactive approach towards our health goals. It's also, in my opinion, how we change the world one person at a time. So that being said, let's get into talking about food sensitivities and allergies and intolerances. It always surprises me, I guess, when patients, don't realize how much their diets affect their immune systems. This time of year is probably when I notice it the most. It's sort of the end of spring or into spring and early summer, because people are struggling with seasonal allergies as the warmer weather is coming. The wet winter leads to an explosion of these pollens and other environmental triggers to our allergens as we move into the spring and the summer. This onslaught of inflammation is caused by an overreaction of our immune system. That's what allergies are. It's an overreaction of our immune system producing antibodies and histamine as a response to this heavy load of airborne allergens. Typically, that's usually what we're thinking about. But these reactions can also be primed by each of our own immune systems and our baseline level of inflammation to begin with. The foods we eat, especially those that we eat with really high frequency, so think about foods that you're eating on a daily basis, are often the reason or contribute to why we experience symptoms of seasonal allergies. But so few people have identified the foods that might be causing problems for them personally, and there's a reason for that. It's really friggin' hard to figure that stuff out. What most people and frankly most doctors fail to recognize is that there are three different ways that our body reacts negatively to foods. So let's go through those. Number one, let's address food allergies. True food allergies should be quite easy to identify, and the reason is because those reactions are immediate. Within 60 seconds, our immune system produces an outburst of an antibody called IgE, immunoglobulin E, which our tissues are extremely sensitive to. So what happens here is that this causes an immediate swelling, typically that's life-threatening. This is your classic peanut allergy, for instance, and why about 1% of Canadians need to carry an EpiPen at all times. So people may also experience something called oral allergy syndrome, or OAS, which is a phenomenon where you feel, typically it's usually described as a numbness or a tingling or an itchiness immediately after touching a food, usually around the lips and the tongue and the inside of the cheeks after we've consumed or touched a food with our mouth or oral area. Usually it's fruits that have pits or that come from trees that are the most likely culprits here. So think apples, peaches, cherries, these are amongst the most common ones. Less life-threatening. Oral allergy syndrome is less life-threatening, but equally acute. It'll still happen almost immediately, within seconds. And because of how quickly we get symptoms from an IgE release and true allergies, usually it should be very easy to identify food allergies, because you eat that food and you immediately get that negative feedback in this case, or that feedback that is negative in nature. So that's why allergies are usually pretty obvious in terms of how easy they are to figure out. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk next about food intolerances. And food intolerances are not immediately life-threatening, and symptoms are usually not as alarming, like your throat closing up, needing an EpiPen. Food intolerances occur when you consume more of a particular food or nutrient than your body is able to digest, that it can't break down into a usable form right away. Symptoms are usually fairly immediate, so within 30 minutes typically. So contrast that to your true allergies, which typically you're going to see symptoms in as little as seconds, so less than 60 seconds almost always. Food intolerances can take up to 30 minutes sometimes for us to see those results. Or those symptoms, and usually those symptoms are associated with the digestive system. So cramping in the gut, diarrhea, loose stools, usually very urgent or even explosive, nausea or vomiting. They are almost always digestive in nature, though, with intolerances. A classic example is lactose intolerance. I always tell the story of, and I don't know if this is just me and the kids I went to school with, but there was always this sort of like challenge that you would do. In Canada, we've got these bags of milk that you can get. If you're Canadian, you'll totally understand what I'm talking about. If you're from somewhere else in the world, you'll be like, what bag in milk in bags? That doesn't make any sense. But the idea was that it's pretty much impossible for most young children and teenagers and even most adults for that matter, to quickly chug or consume an entire bag or entire liter of milk. And that's just because the average person cannot produce enough lactase, the enzyme that's responsible for digesting lactose, in milk. And so what happens is when you drink that milk all at once, your body's going to reject that. And typically that means vomiting. And at the very least, you're going to get some loose stools almost immediately. And that's also what we see in terms of lactose intolerance, is these digestive symptoms that are typically associated with almost immediate symptoms or within half an hour after consuming dairy products with lactose, obviously. And again, in another video, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the prevalence of lactose intolerance and the genetic factors that go into that, and the history of lactose intolerance as well. I think that certainly would be a very fun topic for us to talk about, especially in terms of how different backgrounds of people, different cultures have evolved, changes in terms of how we deal with dairy products in general. So we'll come back to that at another time in the future. So at some level, every single human being on the planet is lactose intolerant. It's all relative to how much you can digest before you run out of the available enzyme, lactase in the case of lactose intolerance, of course, which is the enzyme that breaks down lactose into absorbable forms, so carbohydrates that you can absorb that are more simple. As an example, people of Asian descent are statistically more likely to experience a decline in their ability to produce lactase earlier on in their life. I typically see this in people's 20s, early to mid 20s is where I see this, particularly in Asians. It's certainly, it's also sort of a cliche or a stereotype of naturopathic doctors like myself that, almost everybody gets taken off dairy. While I can't say that that's not certainly at the top of my list in terms of food reactions, when I'm thinking about food and how that might be contributing to lots of different types of symptoms, especially in Asian populations, I definitely think that rises to the higher on the priority list when it comes to adapting or altering someone's diet in my practice. Because food intolerances occur almost immediately within 30 minutes, they are or should be, again, fairly easy to identify, and generally people will start to figure these things out on their own. Food allergies and food intolerances, usually people are going to start to figure that stuff out by the time they hit their adulthood and are preparing their own meals or eating food that they're making decisions on rather than their parents telling them what they should be eating. So now we've talked about food allergies and we've talked about food intolerances, and we've already said that, look, we can't be using these terms, food allergy, intolerance, and sensitivities, which we're about to talk about. Those are not interchangeable terms. They mean different things, and it is doing a disservice to people and shows a lack of understanding of how the body works if we're using those words interchangeably. So, if you missed the beginning of this video, it's just something that really gets my gears going, and that's why we're talking about things today. So let's talk about food sensitivities now, because this is where it can be more difficult for us to figure out how food might be reacting with our body, or how we might be reacting to our foods, I suppose. Food sensitivities are very different and much more difficult to identify than allergies and or intolerances. That's because unlike food allergies or intolerances, unlike food allergies, our bodies are not as sensitive to not as sensitive to an antibody that we call IgG, so immunoglobulin G, and that's typically what we're measuring when it comes to food sensitivities. So if we're defining true allergies as IgE mediated and happening within a minute, food sensitivities are mediated by immunoglobulin G or IgG, and that's the antibody that causes our food sensitivities that we're about to talk about. So with food sensitivities, we usually do not get symptoms until at least half an hour. So if it's within half an hour, it's probably not a sensitivity. I mean, technically could be, but generally speaking, that's how long it starts to take for IgG to accumulate and for us to start to notice any type of symptom. So half an hour after consuming a food that we might be sensitive to. In fact, in many cases, symptoms that we get from food sensitivities might not actually be noticeable and like subjectively noticeable in our lives, clinically relevant, for up to 3 days later. So let me repeat that. Food sensitivities usually don't show symptoms that you notice for at least half an hour and up to 3 days after consuming that food. And that's really difficult for us to figure out what food that is. If it's taking 3 days for us to see symptoms from consuming a food, let's just say eggs as an example, then by the time I get that reaction, I may have had 6, 7, 8, 9 other meals or more, and 20 to 30 other types of food that, could be, making it more difficult for me to identify what that food is that caused that problem. And on top of that, we may also get a cumulative effect from multiple different foods that we might be sensitive to, all contributing to symptoms over the course of a few days as well. So these are all part of the complication in identifying food sensitivities. Food sensitivities can cause different symptoms for different people, and that's why in literature and why conventional medicine or conventional doctors often don't think that food sensitivities are really a thing, and don't think that IgG sensitivities or IgG reactions and that antibody can cause these kinds of symptoms, because it's not causing the same symptom in everybody. A true food allergy very commonly causes a set of reactions that are not just acute and that happen right away and can be easily connected to that food, but they're pretty consistent in terms of the kind of inflammation they produce and where those symptoms occur and the experience that we have when we consume them. Food sensitivities are very different because our body deals with IgG sensitivities and has this level of inflammation that we can clear out in multiple different ways out of our body. And when we have different routes of detoxification and clearance of inflammation, that means that we can get different symptoms that might be digestive, that can often be skin symptoms, it can be joint aches, it can be headaches. In fact, migraine headaches are probably the most well supported in the literature as far as being related to food sensitivities. But those are some of the classic things that we often think about as naturopathic doctors, functional medical doctors, when we're talking about food sensitivities. So for some people, it's seasonal allergies that they notice the biggest impact in. For other people, as I mentioned, it's migraine headaches, again, joint pains, arthritis, brain fog, digestive symptoms, again, can come up. So gas and bloating, especially more chronic gas and bloating, where it seems like we've always got that kind of stuff going on. Those can be food sensitivities. But by the time that you're noticing those food sensitivity symptoms, as I mentioned, it could be hours or days since you actually consumed the biggest culprit food or the initial trigger there. So again, that's what makes it difficult for us to figure out, what those foods are from simple observation. Now, the easiest way, in my opinion, to identify food sensitivities is to test for them through IgG food sensitivity testing. It's a blood test. Typically, it's done with a standard blood draw in office in our clinics. It can also be done through a finger prick blood test, which we often use for children or for those people who don't enjoy blood draws, for instance. The test literally seeks out IgG antibodies that are attached to specific proteins that identify trigger foods. The test takes just a few seconds to draw your blood, and the results are typically returned in less than 10 days in most cases. And from that information, a trained and experienced healthcare practitioner, like a naturopathic doctor, obviously very biased here, but a practitioner can then develop a customized plan of attack to address your symptoms that might be associated with those food sensitivities. But the gold standard is always going to be elimination of target foods and then reintroduction to see how our immune system has either adapted a response to those foods or a level of tolerance for those foods that may have developed as well. So that's where we get into elimination and challenge diets. It's where we talk about, I often refer to it as a 5R program, a gut reset protocol that deals with making sure that we're addressing all the issues that are associated with a proper detox. And we'll talk in other videos about what that looks like as well, the 5R program and the 5 steps to addressing allergies. That's actually a video that I just did recently. So that's another way that we can address things. But usually what happens is we'll take those food sensitivity results, create a 5R gut reset protocol around that, and identify the specific foods that are most likely to be causing problems from that test. Eliminate those foods, typically anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. Hardcore 100% elimination is generally recommended. We'll usually do a lot to improve your detoxification, clearance of inflammation, healing the gut. And then at the end of the process, as I mentioned, we want to also make sure we're improving or optimizing our digestive function, re-encouraging proper digestive function, re-inoculating and repairing the gut. Re-inoculating is a re-establishment of the proper ratio of probiotics or gut bacteria, so that you've got more of the right probiotics and not any of the bad bacteria that we don't want in there in levels that are going to be contributing to symptoms. Identifying and eliminating food sensitivities is a process that really yields great benefits for hundreds of our patients over the years that we've, and so much so that we created a program out of it at my clinics. It's called Food Sense. It's designed to take the guesswork out of your diet. We use it all the time, and especially around this time of year, to address underlying triggers for environmental or seasonal allergies like hay fever. But year round, we run this program a lot as well, because we're using it to address issues around weight management, around joint pains, generalized inflammation, autoimmune processes and autoimmune diseases or disorders, even mood fluctuations and performance and productivity when it comes to the workplace as well, a big part of my platform. Food Sense includes 120 food item test, so it measures an inflammatory response through IgG to 120 different food items and provides you with a customized cleanse protocol, a customized 5R gut reset. So what you're going to find out is what foods might be contributing to your underlying levels of inflammation and give you a clear plan for how to execute a 5R gut reset protocol that really respects the entirety of your body's systems all at once. And that's really where that holistic integrative approach comes into play. Particularly, again, I'm a very biased practitioner here, but particularly as we look at things from a naturopathic standpoint. So if you have any questions about food sensitivities, allergies, intolerances, I want you to throw those into the comments because it's something that when I give presentations and talk about this kind of thing, we often get a lot of questions that arise from it, whether it's the kinds of symptoms that might arise from food sensitivities, how we can gain access to these kinds of tests. Certainly if you're in Vancouver in Canada, that's certainly something we can take care of you for here. But if you're looking for practitioners that are adept at utilizing that kind of data and have this kind of a test available to them, don't hesitate to reach out, and I can connect you with people across the country and maybe even in the States if you're listening from there too. So And bottom line, if you guys have any questions, if you have ideas about other things you'd like to hear about here on Mindset Resilience, slam that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. For now, you guys keep being awesome, and we'll be back again next week, and we'll talk more. We're going to talk a bit more about food sensitivities and detoxes, because there's some other things that really get on my nerves too, and I would love to get those off my shoulders or off my chest. You guys take care.